My name's Nikki Williams. I'm Heritage Programmes Manager at the BFI, National Archive. I oversee the strategic lottery programmes and other projects, and Our Screen Heritage, which is the project that brought the symposium to you today, is one of those projects. Our Screen Heritage is one of our major national lottery programmes. So thank you to everyone who contributes to the lottery. We started this project in April. So last year, April, we launched it. We only have until next March 26 to do this work. So we're about halfway through the project. So I'm just going to introduce my esteemed colleagues. So we have Mark Dogood. Is that right? I realised after 3 years I haven't been pronouncing it right. Mark is the Senior Curator of Archive Projects at the BFI National Archive and oversees, among other things, the representation of archive material on our platforms, on BFI and other platforms. Mark has been involved in all of the BFI's archive platforms, from BFI Screen Online in 2003 to BFI Replay. I have to give a shout out to BFI Replay because that's our new baby, and that's our new streaming platform, which is free. Dylan Cave is our Collections Development Manager at the BFI National Archive. As part of the curatorial senior leadership team, Dylan leads in developing procedures and workflows for the collections acquisition, appraisal and review activities. Dylan is a senior lead on Our Screen Heritage and oversees the digital curatorial archivist team. And then we have Patrick, who you met earlier in the day at the beginning. Patrick is Senior Curator for non-fiction at the BFI, and is also a Senior Lead on Our Screen Heritage, particularly on the contemporary collecting for non-fiction. Patrick works across all areas of non-fiction and has a particular interest in histories, aesthetics and ideologies of 20th century sponsored and industrial film. And he particularly likes the National Coal Board collection.
Somebody has to.
And last but by no means least, we have Annie Shaw at the end. Annie is our public access researcher for the BFI. Annie is working on as a public access researcher on Screen Archive of the Future, which we can talk about outside of here. But Annie has worked across all of our BFI National Archive strategic lottery programmes and has led on copyright from Unlocking Film Heritage, which was one of our early lottery projects, to Our Screen Heritage today, and is currently working on Screen Archive of the Future and still working with us on Our Screen Heritage as well, helping guide us through the IP and copyright complexities.
Joy.
As a closing panel, we wanted to partly reflect on today's discussions, and in the age of superabundance, recognise the challenges that we all face, and as archives and individuals, to collect how we collectively care for our screen heritage for audiences both now and in the future. As I mentioned before, we are only halfway through our journey of doing contemporary collecting, so that's really important to note. And it's also really important to note that we already have huge learnings, which we face every day, and a lot of those challenges that we have and are continuing to experience are very active and live conversations ongoing as we speak. So I just thought it was really important for us to note that. So everyone knows the BFI loves a discussion. So hopefully we can provide a brief insight to why we set out on this critical contemporary collecting project, why we have the ambition to bring 400 online moving image works to the BFI National Archive, and how that's impacting on and what we're learning in terms of our infrastructures and processes. And it will be brief, but we'll all be here afterwards to talk more about it. So without further ado, let's start. So we'll start with Mark. So Mark, as discussed today, a huge amount of early online moving image work has already been lost. Why is online collecting critical, not only for the BFI, but for the whole community?
So, I mean, as you said, the fossil record of online video is already really fragmentary, as we've already been hearing. It just occurred to me this morning that film is in its 130th, or about to turn 130 years old. If we start with the Lumiere brothers, I realise that can be controversial as well. And we're talking about a moving image subset of that, which is 25 odd years old, and already we've lost a lot of that earlier history. We've been here before. Patrick alluded this morning to the early film that was lost. So, of those 130 years, well, it was 40 years before the film archive kind of arose. So by the time there was anybody really in a position to archive it, much of that early work was gone. We've witnessed it again with television. So many people will be aware that the 1970s in particular into the 80s saw a lot of the kind of video record of television wiped because the tapes were reckoned to be more valuable than the programmes they contained. And of course early television was largely live, so it was never preserved in the first place, much of it. So, and there are other little sort of ripples of the same kind of loss that have happened throughout the history of the moving image. So, but the thing about online video is we're not going to have a Mitchell and Kenyon moment. We're not going to have a moment where we find hundreds of these early online works in a shop basement in Blackburn in 100 years' time. That's not going to happen. We're not going to find these lying around, old TV broadcasters in Africa or Asia like we have with old Doctor Who episodes and other TV. So when it's gone, it's really gone. And also, we're not going to have those online, those kind of published catalogues that we've relied on to kind of help to piece together the story of early film, or television, the listings, magazines for TV, the Radio Times. So when it's gone, it's really gone. And so I think the critical thing is that, unless we act now, we won't even, future generations won't be able to look at the now and understand the now. That change in paradigm that Patrick mentioned this morning, this incredible moment of massive structural, industrial, social change that represents that migration from analog media to digital media. And so, kind of it's the responsibility of the archives to try to save what we can, but also I think to try to save an understanding of it. And, luckily this is living memory we're talking about, so it's slightly easier than perhaps some of our some of the earlier cases we were talking about, in order that future historians can understand what the character was of online video. And that's hard because I don't think we collectively, even all the minds in this room and well beyond, can completely describe the character of this thing. But in order to even begin to, I think we have to start feeling out and collecting, cataloguing, curating, and explaining to ourselves as much, and learning.
Patrick, do you want to add to that in terms of, because I think someone mentioned earlier about, it's critical in terms of remaining a living archive as well for us. Well, what are we learning about the past and the future?
Well, in terms of those sort of loss events which occurred over a long period of time that Mark's alluded to, as he said, 1918 is generally considered to be the first moment at which institutional archiving starts at the end of the First World War, but it doesn't really start to take off as a movement until the 1930s, 40 years into the history of the medium. But there isn't just that question of physical loss or digital loss in our own era. I think the other thing you'd learn as an archivist, if the longer you work in the business, and I think all of us here have worked in the business for quite a long time now, the dangers of reductive canonisation of work at the time of its production or soon after its production. In the mid-1930s, when film archiving is taking off as a movement, thank God our predecessors did make some efforts to collect what remained of early film, but early film was not really very well understood at all. There weren't really any serious historians of it, and it didn't have a wide academic study community or wide appreciation amongst the public, or especially appreciation by the film industry of its own past. Those things all came later, thank God that preservation happened in the meantime, so that when it was time for it to enter into the canon, at least some of it was still there. So I think that thing of appreciating the evaluation of bodies of work shifts over time, and it's only possible to do a full evaluation on what survives, even if what survives is done partly on the basis of, as Mark has said, selectivity, application of limited resources, etc. So some things will go, but as Mark said, preserving some of it and attempting to do it according to representing what seem to be the patterns at work in such a way as to sort of continue the archival effort from there.
And the 400 that we're hoping to bring into the archive, what's the process in terms of that selection?
Yeah, I think somebody asked a question about that before lunch as well. I mean, let's just repeat again, 400 is a small number relative to the scale of the bodies of work that are out there. We all know that, but you have to start somewhere. That 400 has a value in itself. But as I think Mark's suggesting, what it allows is testing out selectivity principles. And I always think with moving image archiving that there are broadly, this is very reductive, but there are two kind of key reasons for selecting something and putting it into permanent preservation, or in George's terms, 100 years preservation. One is certain things have a recognisable significance in their own right. This particular work, by virtue of the impact it's had, by virtue of introducing a new technique, and so on. Badgers is an example. Charlie Bit My Finger is an example. Those are films that you would want to represent because they're significant in their own right. There are other things you would want to select more because of their possessional value or their representative value. They may be great films, they may have had a certain impact, but actually part of the reason why you're collecting it is it because it represents some of the typology. So we've done a lot of thinking around these 400, around typology, basically, and trying to work across that typology. But as you go, you keep revising the typology and learning more.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that brings us nicely segues.
I just realised there was one part of the person's question earlier that maybe is worth expanding on a little bit. I think the question was around, once we have selected material, once we are in touch with creators, what are we actually getting? Are we grabbing it off the web, or are we getting material from the donors? And it's basically the latter. We're getting material from the donors and following traditional archival practice of trying to source the best, most original material in the digital world, the least compressed, etc., to become a master preservation copy out of which viewing copies can be generated, etc.
Which brings all of its own challenges, of course, which nicely segues into the questions to Dylan. So let's get practical, Dylan. Not technical, practical. The project has been, and is still being, wholly transformative for the BFI National Archive. How is this lottery project shaping and informing our practices and processes?
Well, for me, I think it's about the opportunity that the project is giving for focus and for articulation as well. So for a little bit of context, this project is happening within and in line with collection that Mark and Patrick have alluded to, which is a vast collection that takes in lots and lots of different kind of moving images across very different formats, from television streaming companies to kind of analog film companies as well. And it's about understanding how the procedures, the way of working that we've been using for that collection that goes back many, many decades, finding a space and a focus, that's what this project is bringing, to bring these materials in a way that kind of gives those 400 the same care and attention and kind of place in the archive alongside this kind of big corpus of material as well. That's been kind of the conceptual challenge, is to kind of bring those together. And I think how that has manifested in our kind of procedures has been to, with this project, given us the space to really look at how we go about this path. one that Patrick alluded to there, which is kind of working closely with curators and donors to kind of take it on this path to where we want to get it, which is a place where we can preserve the materials with a very kind of long view of how we can kind of look after these images and provide access for audiences now and for many years in the future as well. So that has been really the area that I think the project has given us the space to kind of really focus on those procedures. I think there's another element that comes out of this which is really, really valuable, which is that as a team of people looking at these procedures, understanding those processes, writing them down, articulating them and kind of questioning them as well. What we're also doing is creating a way that these archival practices, the knowledge base, is able to be described and therefore shared as well, which means that for new practitioners in the field, they will be able to come in and not try and get things out of people's heads, but also kind of work with, you know, the documentation, the understanding, the articulation of our processes. So that's been the valuable takeaway for me in the first year, which is not bad, actually.
And I think it's safe to say we're on about probably version 4 or 5 of the workflow at the moment, and we're just going to be going through another revision of it to look, you know, to review it. So it's a constant iteration, isn't it, of the workflow and the, you know. And
I think our understanding today is very, very different to what our expectations would have been a year ago, certainly.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, definitely. And because we love a 3-letter acronym, so TLA. Can you? And I know we just have to mention this because otherwise we'll be in trouble with our other colleagues. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing around the digital acquisition infrastructure, the DAI?
Yes. So I'm a co-lead with colleagues from across the BFI. Looking at another strand, which is an acronym is the DAI, which is the Digital Acquisition Infrastructure. We already have a digital preservation infrastructure, and this is it's a service design basically. That's kind of where we're getting to after the first kind of year looking at kind of discovery, and it's thinking about how we can bring materials into the national collection in a way that kind of fulfills some of the things that we as a kind of publicly funded collection body have to kind of fulfill, things like our kind of data standards and the technical standards as well, but in a way we're trying to think about the way that this would happen in a much kind of larger scale, so beyond the kind of the 400 there. As I say, we're still kind of through kind of discovery at the moment, but that in brief is it sits alongside the 400. It's not, there's no dependency there, but it is something that we're looking into. It's very much an R&D kind of strand as well.
Yeah, so very happy to talk more about that, and critically, it's also about obviously cybersecurity as a.
That's a key.
It's a key part of all of that, about how we bring that work in safely. So on to our favourite discussion now, favourite point, IP and copyright, Annie. Annie, I know there's lots to say. What are the challenges for IP and copyright in regards to online content? What's some of the challenges?
Well, I thought I'd start a bit just by saying, in terms of the Our Screen Heritage project we're working on, and rather, am I doing some weird feedback? In a sort of similar way to what Dylan was describing in terms of the processes and things we're working on, this is actually an unusual project for us in the copyright world, in that we are not actually trying to clear rights. It isn't a mass rights research clearance project. What we're aiming to do is actually build up some very key foundational bits of the data that we collect when we acquire works. I've used a lot of, been inspired a lot by other organisations to learn how they do that. And that's by how do we find out who owns the copyright to the things we're collecting, because it may not always be the donor. And in some respects, the challenges for online video are the same for any material that an archive collects, because an archive has a role as preserving but also providing access. And we quite often sit in that middle position of wanting and needing to provide access but not having any rights in the material that we are given, therefore needing to clear the rights. And I think it's kind of interesting in a way that copyright is it's a law. There are definitions of particular roles, and who gets the copyright in something is down to all these definitions. And even the definitions of works that are protected by copyright, it's all in the definitions. So talking about film now being 130 years old or whatever, it was actually only in 1956 that copyright was then protected as a copyright work in its own right, as an actually defined thing. So 56, long time, from the 1890s. And listening to lots of the talks today and looking at the kind of material, copyright, as I was saying, relies on these defined roles, but it may be that these roles don't really relate or work so well or are really thought about in the same way with the creation of online material. So copyright likes to know who the principal director is, and they like to know author of screenplay and author of dialogue and composer of music. But a lot of the time, the roles, they may be doing the same or similar creative acts and creative sort of components, but it may not be something that's actually always thought about in the creation of the work. So what we've done as a new thing as part of this project, which isn't new in the archive world, but is a way to try and find out a bit more information about this, is a questionnaire that goes out to donors to ask or tease out, if we can, information about who's involved in the creative process of these works and whether it's kind of clear who is designated a director. Obviously there may be multiple directors, multiple creators making these works, so that we can start building up the data to have in our collections information database, so that we can know one day what we can actually do with these things and crucially how long copyright will last. So those are just a few of the things that it's not always easy to map these sort of traditional, rather 19th or early 20th century ideals of certain creative roles or the author with, I think, some of the practices that sort of happen now.
And also, I mean, I think because we're actively, this is quite different for us as a concept, we're actively going out and acquiring work in a bigger scale than we've done before. It's also that why we're doing it as well, isn't it? That cultural context that we're trying to.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work with our colleagues in curatorial to try and provide more of a sort of guidance and information about what an acquisition agreement is. They are legal contracts. There's a lot of legalese in them, but we're trying to make sure we have kind of plain English explanation of what all the bits are of a contract and why we need them, to make it clearer and be more transparent really about what it is we're asking you, the donor, to give us, and what's the difference between the physical ownership and the intellectual property ownership. So try and sort of demystify some of these things that can get a bit convoluted sometimes.
Yeah, trying to be a bit more user-friendly.
Yes.
Were there any questions, so just over to either online or in the audience? George. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
So yeah, if we take Sapphire's ballroom videos or one of those videos as a potential, part of the 400, I'm curious because, they have a copy sitting on a satin pillow that doesn't necessarily have an audience. And there's a copy sitting in YouTube which does have an audience. And for my money, there's a new opportunity when you archive things that live online to represent the audience of an object in a way that you can't if all you want to acquire is the biggest version, that might be sitting on some local system. So I was curious to hear, perhaps from Dylan or Mark, are you considering some representation of the audience as well, if in your acquisition of an online object?
we shuffle out, maybe better, Patrick, if you want to.
Oh, okay.
It's closer to perhaps the decision.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons for trying the reasons for trying to get files that are as close as possible to the original is, as I say, is kind of following historic archival practice, where if you want to analogize it to film, you know, the Platonic ideal is to access the original negative, which contains the most amount of photographic information. That's the best thing technically for preservation. You might acquire a number of other elements as well, including perhaps copies that have screened in the world, might have some scratches on them because they've been run through some projectors, etc. So I don't think there's an absolute either or in this situation. Where there is a bit of an either or element is the resources of this project, which is we can only collect 400 films. I mean, if we go back to the previous panel, I think in terms of the Otherness Archive, for example, I think 500 works were mentioned, which is already 100 more than we're able to collect at this moment in this project across all genres, all types of filmmaking, representing online video of the last 30 plus years. We have had a bit of discussion around that idea of how do you represent the story of the video in the world, and those are kind of still evolving discussions, to be honest. And you know, maybe part of the solution there is to choose some case studies where you can try and really go deep into all of the different platforms it sat on and what comments sat around it, etc., etc. But we do have to work with the systems and the resources we've got, and the central thing is the film, and always essential to capture context as well, which we do partly by talking to creators, building that into our interpretation when we make this project something that sort of the output is publicly available to people.
Yeah, and I just want to say that actually I've had a lot of food for thought for me today, actually, George, as well, in terms of that context. I was writing down, you know, and I do think it's something we need to, think about harder, and definitely something that I'll be going away with my colleagues and thinking about how we can do that. Does anyone else want to say anything?
I mean, I'd say in terms of kind of the object, the issue of the object, I think that, you know, as a curatorial team, we are kind of, have kind of different kind of strengths and stuff like that. And I think the focus, as Patrick said, using the kind of the analog analogy, is I think it's something that we're driven by in the project, is to make sure that the objects that we are collecting, we can in the best way possible kind of try to make sure that those objects will have an onward life, and that does demand a certain way of collecting in terms of access to the digital file. And I'm not technical, so I need to be careful that I don't get too far into this, the details of it, but just understanding that the file that we need to be, in order to be able to kind of do the best we can for preserving the file in decades to come, has to be kind of collected in a certain way. So.
I did want to say, though, one of the things that we thought actually, and that is starting to happen, is that I did think that maybe when we embarked on this project, that maybe working with creators of online, you know, work for online would be different to the sort of donors and filmmakers that we've worked with before. And I think that is bearing out, actually, as we're going through the project in terms of collaboration. It's much more collaborative, I think. Just that Whisper Red recently came to the archive and made an ASMR at the archive. So that's been brilliant. And personally, and I think all of us would like to see more of that collaboration. And I think it is, like you say, about contextualising the creator's work, but also having more of a collaborative, open relationship with them as the BFI. So more, always open to ideas.
I mean, if I can add also on George's question, I think it's absolutely right to say that there is a kind of quite rare opportunity to capture something live. I mean, historically, as film historians, we've struggled with accessing audience experience and finding ways to represent it. It took a sort of mass observation exercise, you know, in the 40s to really dig into kind of how people experienced and interpreted film, and there have been various attempts to do that since, and we've got fan magazines and all that, but to actually have something right there in front of us, you know, recording those experiences in real time is an opportunity, but it's also quite, it's a new territory. So I think we're alive to the possibility, but we have to work out the how, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, there's more questions. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Something that came up, I guess, from the last panel and then into this panel is a question around preservation and accessibility. And I just listening to those three panelists speak so well, in the last panel about how their archiving practice really reflects and is sympathetic to the content of the material they're archiving, but also to their audience. And I wonder how the BFI is prioritising or being sympathetic to the content, the idea of the online, the accessible, in its work around preservation, which maybe is less around accessibility and more around preservation, if that makes sense. I just wondered if you could speak to how sympathetic the process of this project has been in terms of access and not just preservation.
Well, there will be a big sort of access moment at the end of the project where we'll make as much of this material available as possible. Obviously, a lot of it's available on the open web now, so it's actually the contextualizing of it within a collection that kind of gives it new meaning. But there are also other things, particularly some of this early internet stuff, which isn't accessible at the moment, and we would want to make as much of that as accessible as possible. And there has clearly been a massive shift within the archive sector generally over the last generation towards an emphasis on public access, as witnessed by things like BFI Player, the Mediatek, and many other resources that other institutions run. But at the same time, there's a certain tension inside of what you're asking as well, isn't there, around what donors of material actually want. Some of them may want maximum access, but we've also heard questions today about how much control can creators still have over access to material, etc. I mean, a lot of that is basically governed by the donor agreement that gets signed at the point that material goes into the collection. But this is definitely, the purpose of this project is preservation. That is the core purpose, but there will be access outcomes from it, is the plan. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah. I guess I'm kind of interested in, like, because it's the internet we're talking about here, it's not film and cinemas, which the internet was, I guess, prefaced on this idea of accessibility for all, open access almost. And I wonder how that can seep into the BFI or be shown in the BFI as a way of reflecting some of that, not just in terms of access on the BFI's terms, but access on the terms of the internet, the utopian idea of the internet. Like, what will it look like? What will the interface look like when we see this stuff? Will it just look like another, like, will it be look like the BFI? Will it look different because it's reflecting the internet? I'm interested in that kind of user experience, I guess, and how it was made and then how it gets accessed again.
I think you're asking questions we're not fully able to answer at this point, but perhaps you also.
But it's a very good question, and
Thank you.
Yeah, and there are, I think there's things happening around other platforms that we have, that those questions we need to consider in the whole, like you say, how it's presented at the end, definitely. I think.
Can I just add very quickly? I mean, if things are published on the web under open licenses, and we're acquiring it, and it's very clear that there are open licenses, and so it can be used under those terms, then that's how it's out there. So making it very, if possible, very clear how these things can be used anyway, then that's something for us to kind of carry on. Or just making it as clear as possible, because for us to make things as accessible, we then have to deal with, are all the rights cleared in this? So thinking about material that, say, uses a lot of third-party material, clips, music, which may have been either cleared or used under an exception for education, for quotation, for parody, we then still have to go through a kind of process to say, does that still work for us? Can we rely on those exceptions? So if we want to make it as available, the copy that we have, then that's an extra layer that we have to look at from our role as a National Archive as well.
Yeah. I'm afraid that we haven't got time for any more questions, but if anyone wants to come and talk to us afterwards and join us, please join us for drinks. And thank you very much, and thank you to the panel. Thank you.
Amazing. You all stay there because this is not going to take long. Hi, I'm Emma Sarr. I'm the Director of Collections Learning Engagement at the BFI, which does exactly what it says on the tin. I have the teams that collect the work, that create learning opportunities about the work, and do things like today, which is engage audiences with the work. And it says closing remarks, but really it's my duty to kind of like give the call to action for how you can get involved in this Our Screen Heritage project. As we've seen from the interesting discussions that have taken place throughout today, and it has really been a fantastic day, the team have done amazing. Archiving online video is a collaborative endeavour. From creator to curator, there are many people involved in collecting and preserving this third revolution of the moving image. And now we need your help, everyone in the room, everyone that's listening at home, and the general public, to take this revolution further. We want to learn which online moving image titles from the dawn of the internet to today have entertained you, inspired, or struck a chord, and which you think we should be adding to that 400 title ambition of adding it to the BFI National Archive. It could be your favourite web film or a viral sensation. It could be a fond memory of seeing a video on Periscope. Anyone remember Periscope as a platform? Showing my age there a little bit. Please share your recommendations with us and we'll do the rest. There's the QR code. Scan it now. It's on across all our website. This messaging is up on the website right now as well, if you don't have your phones on you, or if, like me, you always take a photograph instead of an actual kind of like go through to the website. And if you've got any questions, like we've been saying throughout the day, we're still around, the team are around. Come and talk to us in the Blue Room for those that are in the room in the South Bank. Sorry, I can't invite everybody at home to that, obviously, but come ask us questions and we'll be glad to share more about this project. So all that's left for me is to say a few thank yous. Once again, I'd like to thank the BFI Screen Heritage Fund awarding National Lottery funding for the support of this event and for our Screen Heritage project. I want to thank all our guests that have joined us today and talked so openly about your work. Thank you to our fantastic panel chairs for all your hard work putting the panels together. And finally, a massive thank you to the Heritage Programme team and especially to Gemma and Alex P. You've seen these two people running about with clipboards all day. We wouldn't be here today without their massive sterling effort in putting this together, so they deserve a massive round of applause. Before I can say the bar is open. So yeah, just join me in thanking the team. Doing so well. Thank you all for coming in person and online. So, that's such a strange thing to say. Yeah, the bar's open. I know 4:30 might be a little bit early. There is non-alcoholic drinks as well. Come join us. Those at home, go make yourself either a cocktail or a cup of tea. Thanks.